very good evening to you. You're watching Face the Nation, and this evening is going to be a special edition of our show where we are going to discuss a topic that is also discussed by all the politicians in the run-up to an election, and as soon as the election is over, it is forgotten. Poverty and inequality in our country is an issue that has been spoken for a very long time by those who rule the country and those who wish to rule the country. But as soon as an election is over, this poverty and inequality that is faced by the general public seems to be forgotten. Today, we are going to focus our attention on poverty and inequality. However, we are also going to draw the attention to our findings through the Gum at the initiative, the Gum at the door-to-door initiative that we as a network has been carrying out. So, without further ado, let's introduce our panel of guests this evening. We have Emeritus Professor Siri Hettige of the University of Colombo. We have Professor Tilak Wijayatunga, Professor of Geography at the University of Peradeniya, and we have Dr. Vinya Aryaratna, President of the Sarvodaya Movement, and of course Azra San, Assistant Manager of English News and Gum at the Team Leader. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this evening to talk about this serious topic that everyone knows about, but no one really knows an answer to. At the outset, let me take a start like this, and I want to focus my attention to Professor Siri Hettige. Now, Professor, everyone right now at this moment are talking of development, talking of building wavers, talking of doing various projects with a very limited amount of time leading up to a possible election at the end of the year. Now I want to ask you, Professor, you and I have been seated for programs and we have discussed this vast issue, this big issue of poverty in our country. But every year this seems to worsen, and we have seen areas where there has been no development whatsoever for a very, very long time. Now, Professor, my question to you is very simple. Let's identify and understand what we mean by this poverty, first of all, before we move forward in today's debate. Can you explain to me what we mean by this poverty and these poverty lines that everyone is talking about at the outset, Professor?
Well, I think we have been basically talking about poverty in this country over the last several decades based on what is usually referred to as the poverty line. Those who fall below the poverty line are classified as poor people, and those who are above the poverty line are not classified as poor. So the point is that this is really a measure of income poverty. In other words, you look at the distribution of income across households in the country, and then you basically identify the group of households that fall below the poverty line. But of course, poverty, as you know, is not only a matter of income. Poverty is also a matter of so many other things. Like, for instance, if you take income itself, you have to also talk about expenditure. And we have in fact a lot of data coming from the census department that we can use to understand what this whole problem is about. For instance, if you look at, I looked at the 2016 income and expenditure survey, household income and expenditure survey, and there of course we see very significant inequality in income distribution across households. But when you look at also in conjunction with income inequality, the expenditure pattern across households, you see a very interesting pattern, and that is lower 50% of the households, that is people with lower incomes, lower 50%, they actually do not earn enough money to meet the basic needs of the households. In other words, the expenditure of the lower 50% is always higher than the income. So in other words, you can also, without talking about poverty line, you can simply ask, what is poverty? Poverty is when you don't have enough money to spend on what you basically need at your household level. So the point is that if you go by income and expenditure data that is coming from the census and statistics department, you have 50% of the population having a problem with their income and expenditure gap. So in other words, here we are talking about an income deficit. They don't really have enough income to meet the basic needs of the household members. But of course, there are so many other dimensions. These days, we talk about not only income poverty, we talk about multi-dimensionality of poverty. In other words, it is not only a matter of income, but also how you are placed in terms of how you access or how you have access to a whole range of services that you need. Now here, when I go back to that survey that I mentioned, the reason why you have this income deficit, in the first the first 50% or the lower half of the households, it is basically because of the expenditures that they have to incur for education, health and transport. Now of course these are three areas where you can have policies that can really reduce the burden on the households in terms of expenditures incurred in the areas of education, health and public transport. We all know that in Sri Lanka we have a big problem with all three areas, because people, though we say that people have access to free education, in fact it is a major item of expenditure at a household level. Similarly, we say that we have free health, but we also know that health is a major item of expenditure at a household level. And then finally, when you look at transport, once again we know that the poor people depend on public transport, but there are serious issues, and as a result people also spend quite a lot of money on transport. So I think it is because of these three areas that many people find it very difficult to manage with whatever they earn, and therefore they are really struggling.
Thank you, Professor Hettige, for your opening statement. Very quickly, let me move on to Professor Tilak Bandara. Now, 50% of the people are having trouble, is what Professor Hettige has to say. Now, you have been a part of the Gamma process from the outset, from the University of Peradeniya. You have been an integral part, a core part of how information is gathered with regard to that very same book that you see in front of you. The viewers can also see it. This is the third edition of the Gamma, the door-to-door documentation that we have been able to do. Professor, you have seen firsthand this issue with us, with our teams as well. From the information that is available to us, how severe is this problem in our country?
Yes, Chaturanga, yes, that's good. As Professor Hettige mentioned about, that's the 50% in the areas are getting the poverty. I think when we are visiting the villages in Sri Lanka, we have seen that above the 50% actual rate is going above, that's above the 50%. But Chaturanga, what I want to tell you is that when you go through these villages, through these Gamma programs, what I seen is that the Sri Lanka is very rich with the resources. Actually, this is the golden islands. And we are very rich with a lot of resources like water resources, forest resources, land resources, and the soil. And when you look into the other things like the mineral resources and everything we have, the problems when you go to the villages, when we are looking at the villages, we have seen that a lot of people are suffering from a lot of problems which I said about the soil related problems, land related problems, water related problems, and the forest and the other resources related lot of problems they have. Then because why we have the resources, and because some countries they are poor because they don't have the resources. The resource availability is very less, but why we are poor? That is what the major problems. Because this is, I think our national policymakers, they need to think about this, how their policy should be developed. There is a very big failure with our national policy. What I am saying is that because of the policy, if we have the good policy to adjust to the community who is living in the rural areas to improve their local livelihoods, we have the resource. If we are using that resource, we can develop that. I think development is not a big problem. But here, Chatura, the problems, you see, if you get the water related policies, in Sri Lanka, we are very rich with the water. But when you visited every villages, I think when you look at the government, the programs, we have seen that every villages where we are going, people are saying about the water resource is the major problems. In some time, the geographically where they are located, that may be impacting for a resource. But the some villages where we are visiting, but resources is available, but resources is underutilized. That is why the people are facing the big problems. That's why the big issue is coming. But some areas the poverty is increasing the geographical locations of the villages, and the other thing about the less access to the resources and the resource distribution patterns, that is also highly impacting to the Sri Lankan poverty. And the another major problem what we have seen is that the unemployment in the rural areas, because of these changes, it is highly impacting for their livelihoods. That's what they are facing the big problems. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Bandara. Let me also very quickly move into Dr. Vinya Ariyaratne, who is the president of the Sarvodaya movement. Doctor, now we have heard two eminent professors speaking about the poverty level in our country. You are the president of the Sarvodaya movement, who has been actively involved in projects to uplift and elevate poverty in our country and other projects as well. Doctor, my question to you is this. Now, we see a situation where we ourselves have found out that the poverty and the lack of infrastructure, lack of development, lack of access has been a major issue. And as Professor Bandara says, the lack of policies also play a very vital, integral role in the people being this way in our country. Now, Doctor, how do you view all of this lack of policy and the absolute negligence towards rural Sri Lanka? What is your view?
Chaturanga, I think as Professor said, the poverty is now defined in terms of income. I don't fully agree with that definition. I think there's deprivation in different ways, not just in people not having an adequate income to satisfy their basic needs. With poverty, there is powerlessness. Actually, the communities are deprived of basic needs and also at the same time access to resources. There's no equal playing field for most of the people who are trying to really survive in economic terms. So this inequality is actually a manifestation of a wrong system. It's not just lack of policies. I think our country has enough and more policies which are very progressive, but there's a deficit in terms of implementation, and also the economic model and also the governance model is really not addressing the structural causes of poverty. Now, when you look at the disparities that we observe in our country, which are manifested in health indicators, nutritional indicators, because country as a whole, we can be happy that we have some very good indicators in terms of social well-being. But when you really look at different districts and go down to the grassroots level, you see vast differences. How can you explain those differences? You can explain only in terms of really when you look at the determinants. Determinants are really political and economic. So, is the economic model that we are following, is it really perpetuating poverty or really eradicating poverty? And at the same time, even the political system, I think, is sustaining itself because of the level of poverty. So, the poverty really feeds into that corrupt political system, and the patronage political system's survival depends on sustaining poverty. So, I think we have to address now the root causes of poverty, which may not have been the case 20-30 years ago when the country as a whole was really a low income country, but now I think this is this level of poverty and inequality is really created. It's not a natural thing, so we can address if we fix the system.
Thank you, Dr. Ariyaratne. Dr. Ariyaratne, as well as the two professors, have brought us to an interesting juncture for us to debate further about poverty and inequality in our country. Before I move on to my colleague Azra Hassan, I want to draw your attention to a few clips that we have put together. Now, through our Gammed initiative, as Professor Bandara mentioned, we have been travelling to all the districts in our country, and this is the 4th edition of the Gammed, the door-to-door initiative. And through this, we have been able to find out various issues that are faced by the general public living in our country. And one of the very main problems that we have been able to identify is this particular problem. And let me draw your attention to this video clip from Ampara. so that you get a better idea of what I'm going to talk about next.
Kammetta Keinketa.
In the Ampara district, 200 families live in Pannalgama in Anamadua. These families, whose livelihood is dependent on cultivation, is the lack of irrigational water. They are not asking for luxuries, they are merely asking for water to grow their cultivation.
Kammetta Keinketa.
That was a report filed by one of our colleagues who was in Ampara, going from door to door, identifying the problems, and they told us the main problem in this area, in addition to the lack of clean drinking water, is the inavailability of water altogether for agricultural purposes as well. With that, let me draw your attention to Azra, who has just returned from Gum at the Door-to-Door initiative tour over the weekend. Azra, you have also been a part of this, and you too have seen firsthand the problems faced by the people. The so-called development, the so-called exorbitant use of slogans in the run-up to the election. Do you see that in practical life, in reality? Do you see that? Did you see that when you travel to all of these places?
Chaturanga, I just returned from Ampara yesterday, and what I really came across when we went from house to house and door to door was one common thing that I heard was villagers say that "Ape gama amataka vela." They say that their villages have been taken off from the Sri Lankan map. So when the villagers say that, how do you think that the development is actually taking place in the country? We are not talking about the complicated issues that you and I have. Let's take for an example, let's say that we will have a water cut in our areas. Can you just imagine the number of times they will complain about not being able to access to clean drinking water? The difference is that people in these areas are actually living with it. We at least have a choice, but they don't. There are villages where people walk miles just to obtain water and along a dilapidated road. So Chaturanga, what I experienced during my tour to Ampara was that although they say that the development is taking place in the country or that infrastructure is being uplifted in the country, when we went to those rural villages from house to house and door to door, we did not see any development taking place. We saw about 50 families depending on one water tap. So they have to walk all the way from their houses carrying pots with their children just to collect water. So like you said, they talk about development. They say that highways are being built, they say that roads are being fixed, and all sorts of luxurious things, but we came across people with no places to live, with no water to drink, or with no roads to travel to school. There are times that children have to return back home because they don't have a proper transportation system in the country, in the village, or that they don't have lands to cultivate, whereas their main source of income is cultivation. So development is something, we saw a lot of things during the Gamad, the door-to-door campaign, but development was one main thing that we did not come across.
Thank you, Asa. With that, let me open the floor for questions from our journalists. This evening, we have a new face on our program, Jayamal Ratnayaka, joining us on Face Nation, and of course, Mr. Shehan Ranatunga also joining us on Face the Nation as the journalist panel. Both of these gentlemen, along with Azra, have been a part of the Gamad initiative and have been travelling to various places in the country. Jayamal and myself, we travelled to Polonnaruwa, Dehiyattakandiya and the surrounding areas, and I have to agree with what Azra says. Development is not something we saw in these areas. So let me open the floor for questions. Gentlemen, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chaturanga, and good evening, gentlemen and Azra. I'd like to direct my first question towards Professor Siri Hettige. Now, sir, you spoke about poverty and where poverty means when people can't even afford basic necessities. But a couple of weeks ago, we found out that Sri Lanka has moved to the upper middle income category in the GNI index. And does that necessarily mean, on the outset, does that necessarily mean that poverty is being alleviated, or is it simply only a statistic? Is there something more to it?
Well, in fact, we have been moving from low income to lower middle income, and now we are being told that we are now in middle income. In other words, in terms of income, we have been basically moving up. But on the other hand, this is really an average. And when when you divide the national income by the population, you get an average. But the point is that it doesn't say very much about the distribution. And actually, we are here talking about income distribution across the country, and of course across income groups and across regions, and of course the rural-urban disparities in terms of income distribution. Now, the reason why we have serious problems of poverty and inequality is because that we have low income, but because we have a highly unequal distribution of income. And that is what we should be talking about. Of course, it's not only a matter of income, as Vinya rightly pointed out. It is also a matter of so many disparities. Now, as you know, the last 40 years, we have had a very, very clear urban bias in terms of development. Whereas if you look at the period from, let's say, the time of independence up to 1977, we had a fairly clear rural bias. In other words, we were trying to really push development to rural areas, to areas where there was, very few economic activities and so on and so forth. For instance, the agricultural sector was resuscitated over a period of time, by taking so many policy measures, like for instance, land, alienation, distribution of land among landless people. The entire colonization scheme in the north central province and also in the rest of the dry zone basically took so many people from densely populated wet zone areas to these highly, let's say dry areas by basically developing irrigation facilities. Like, the development of irrigation. I mean, the Mahaveli, before Mahaveli also, we had, quite a few, let's say, irrigation projects, Galloe, for instance, Chandrika, and so many other Minneria and so on and so forth. So we basically had a fairly rural, and then of course even in terms of industrialization, we had a fairly rural bias, in the sense that industries were not concentrated in urban areas alone. Industries were taken to many parts of the country. I mean, if you look at all the primary industries that were established from the 1950s to the mid 1970s, they were basically scattered across the country. So in other words, people had access to resources, like for instance the land and water, and also access to employment by way of industrial employment, and then of course also various other let's say rural industries like craft production and so on. So what I'm trying to get at is that it is possible to address the issue of poverty and income inequality and also other inequalities through various measures that you take, by way of state interventions. Now, of course, there are other areas where you can concentrate, like for instance, taxation policy. This is a country which had a fairly equal distribution of income, in the world in the 1970s, like for instance in the early 1980s. And that was because we had a fairly progressive taxation policy. And as a result, though income was low, the income that was there was distributed fairly equally, and therefore there was no concentration of wealth in the country to the extent that we observe today. So whereas the last 4 decades, we have had a very different approach to economic development, where we did not really wanted to maintain the sectoral balance within the economy, like rural agriculture, industries, and the services. Now today we have an economy which is largely dominated by service industries, and you can see people have been basically moving away from rural areas over the last four decades, and we have for instance, urban service industries basically absorbing the labor that is leaving the countryside. And of course we also have a huge proportion of the labor force employed outside the country, in the Middle East and so on and so forth. So the point is, there is a gross distortion of the economy today in terms of sectoral balance, in terms of disparities between rural and urban areas and so on. So I think we need to really take these aspects into consideration if we really want to address these issues.
Dr. Ariratna, a question to you. Now, when you take a look at all of these people living in rural Sri Lanka, these are votes too. These people also go to the polling booth. These people also cast vote to be whatever party it is, be the UNP, the SLPP, SLFP, JVP, whatever the party is, they also cast their vote. They are also important citizens of our country. Then why are they neglected to this extent, where there are elephant fences built, but you can touch it with your hand because there is no power? Someone has robbed the battery that provides power. There are canals that have been dug, but there is no water because someone has a land issue somewhere along the line. What is going on in our country? Because these people are also important. They are not animals, they are humans. Then what is happening?
Absolutely. I think the problem is our people are just voters. They are not active citizens, and there is no accountability in the current political system. So you get the vote based on this patronage political system, because the system is such that if you want to get your child admitted to school, you need a political connection, or if you want to have a job, you need to go through the local politician. So because of that patronage political system, the people really are disempowered to the extent that they are only voters. So I think we need to change that system where the representatives, the people's representatives, are really accountable to the people. We need to start that from the local government level. Now, if you look at the legislators, they are really not at all accountable to even to their electorates.
Absolutely.
At the same time, we also have a problem. We are expecting the elected representatives to fulfill the needs in the
but they should be, doctor. That's why we appoint
correct,
them.
but that has to be now we know that there is government wealth. No, there is money. Where is that money? That money is going to entertain and look after the elected representatives disproportionately. So it's not a matter of lack of resources. The resources are there, but they are being the priorities are elsewhere. So I think, like what Azra said, those are basic needs. Why should GovMed or any other organization go and fulfill those needs? Isn't that the responsibility of the state? Doesn't the state budgeting system really look at the real needs of the community? So I think we really need to change that system where maximum devolution of power needs to be given to the community level, where the people can have a say in how the allocated resources are being used, including the local government allocations. So if we can change the system to really give more power to the people. There are enough and more examples through cooperative system, and even the organization that I represent, Sarvodaya, we have created community-based organizations which are taking responsibility to manage their own affairs to the extent that's possible. So that level of autonomy, if you can guarantee and get them to really control the resources that are allocated, and also give them the capabilities, whether it is training or education, and also opportunities for employment, enterprise development, technical support, access to low interest finance and so on. I think there's a lot that you can do within the existing system while we look at a different governance system for the country.
Dr. Ariratna, now we are talking of Azar spoke about Ampara, I spoke about Deyattakandiya, faraway places. We don't have to go that far to find this problem, Professor Bandara. The problem is not that far. I want to draw your attention to a clip that we have from Kegol, which is not so far away. Now, we might think that because it's closer to the capital, closer to where we live, the situation might be different there. Look at this clip from Kegol and let's talk after.
කම්මැත්ත ගෙයින් කෙට
In Kegol, the Beharella villagers spoke to us about their problems. Due to the lack of proper entry routes into the village, these residents face immense hardships.
කම්මැත්ත ගෙයින් කෙට
Now, Professor Bandara, this is Kegol, not so far away. Now, when I went on Gammet, then I inspected, I was with Jayamal and his team. We saw a situation that was slightly different to this. Like Dr. Ariyaratne mentioned, a group of people had got together. They are fixing a bridge across a river so that their children can go to school, they can take their produce to the village, to the town. They are themselves getting together and building a bridge because they know that the politicians will only come during an election season. Now, these are people, as I asked Dr. Ariyaratne, living in our own country, voting for the same set of people that we vote for, or sometimes we don't, but they are treated in this manner. They are now crossing through a ferry because they don't have an access route into the village that they live. Professor Bandara, how do we start to even solve this problem?
Yeah, Chaturanga, what you said is correct, is that you can see the river and the village in the other sides and the other side the city. Actually, we have seen that in some places also, the government, they started to work on, then they allocate the big money for that, and it is not to work. But the government, what we did is that we get as Dr. Vinya mentioned about, that's the community supporting programs, community involvement programs are highly strength for that. Because why I am saying that, because of getting the community supports, we develop lot of roads, bridges, and the other development strategies what the villagers needed. But what I want to tell you is that the Dr. Ariyaratne said about that's the government allocations. One thing you see, Chaturanga, we have the central governments, and you see we have the provincial government, what I am saying, provincial council, and we have the local governments.
Yes.
And three governments are working to develop these islands with a lot of politicians and a lot of government officers are involving, secretaries, ministries, and everybody are involving.
About 1,000.
Yeah, and you see, and how many government officers are in the villages? It's nearly 20. Then nearly 20, about 20, I think. Sometimes there is no families in the villages, like the officers are involved with the villages, but the villages are poor. And the other side, you see, in our government budgets, how much money we are allocating, the central governments and the provincial governments and the local governments, how much money they are allocating to develop these rural areas.
If you take all those three provinces, there are about 10,000 people.
Then you see then how much money they are allocating and how much money they spend for the development.
Yes.
That's what I think we need to see, that's how they are going for the development. But they spend a lot of huge amount of money for the development. I think that is the biggest.
Jayamal Chan, just one question with your permission to Dr. Ariyaratne again. Now, Doctor, everyone in this room and majority of the people who are watching us, if they are law-abiding citizens, pay their taxes. Be it directly or indirectly, they pay their taxes. And again, this comes to a situation where we have to raise the question. People are without water, people are without access routes, people face the wild elephant conflict on a day-to-day basis. Now then, where is our tax money going?
I think there is also a question of spiritual poverty. There is a moral decay. You know, you can't look at poverty in isolation. There's on the other extreme, there's affluence. So there is insensitiveness amongst those who are in power, and also a certain section of our society who really don't care, even though they are in powerful positions. So I think in order to address these issues, we also have to address ethical and moral issues at an individual level. So how to do that, how to get the policymakers and leaders, political leaders of this country really care for the ordinary people. Now, the examples that you cited where people coming together and trying to fulfill their own needs, which is very good. It has to be a partnership. I don't think people should be given everything by the state. I think there has to be an element of sharing the costs to contributing that will to that particular project, which will bring the communities together and social cohesion and all that. However, the question is this accountability of the system towards the citizens of this country. So that can only happen if the people start demanding. I think there are various means through which the citizens can now hold the elected officials accountable. There is, for example, the Right to Information Act. So you can ask what is the amount of money allocated for our area, and then ask for the plans. Do the plans really reflect the needs of the community? So the solution lies within ourselves as citizens. We have to be active citizens, organized citizens, go beyond elections and try to demand, and that will put enough pressure on the politicians to change their ways of doing things.
Dr. Ariyaratne, elaborating further on Chaturanga's question about people coming together now, when we were touring in Ampara and Padiyatalawa and whatnot, we found out now the particular village that we were touring in was Ambalavatta, and basically the village didn't have access to mainland during the rainy season, and it was a mere bridge that they were asking for in order for them to cross, and the dedication or the need was there for the people to come together, and they were willing. They were telling us, we are willing to build this bridge using our own dedication and our own manpower if the authorities provide us with the necessary resources. Do you think, if I word this as community-based volunteerism, I think I might be correct. Do you think if at least we build a national policy where we can provide residents of particular villages with the necessary resources and the necessary items that they require, they will use their own manpower and they will create what they need in order to solve their own problems? Do you think that is a valid solution?
That is definitely a solution. So that's what we have also been advocating for, what we call Grama Swaraj, village self-governance. There are 38,000 villages in Sri Lanka. There are about 14,000 Grama Niladhari divisions. Now we have an electoral system at the local government level where we have wards. So now that is devolved to the ward level. There is a elected representative for the ward. Now if we make the ward, for example, we would like it to be at the village level, an autonomous entity where they plan and the government directly provides the assistance to that particular community organization. Right? Then there will be ownership, because it's not just about the infrastructure being built. After that you have to maintain it, whether it's a water system, access road or a bridge. When the community is responsible for really planning, of course they will need technical support and guidance and material and things like that, which the government can provide with the, as Professor Bandara said, with the existing personnel who are assigned to the village, the government servants. So that is the ideal model, and that can work. Then there is less corruption, then there is also efficiency. Then if you spend 100 rupees, 99 rupees will go directly to that particular
There's more transparency.
Project. Exactly, more transparency. So I think that is what we should work towards, and I hope that whoever is going to contest elections will take on this Grama Swaraj concept or devolution of power to the village level. I think that will address most of these problems. Finally, I think we can't just plan based on single villages. There has to be a way where we bring markets together, people's sort of different industries where you have to have efficiency in a bigger scale. So the principle of subsidiarity can be then taken upwards and have a system where we, in our traditions, we have sharing and caring. So that needs to be brought up. So then it's not just about income that you are talking. It's about happiness, you know. Some countries have adopted gross national happiness. It's not gross national income. So those are the more progressive things that are being, tested around the world, new economic models. So a new economic model based on devolution of power and a new political system can address inequality and poverty in Sri Lanka.
Professor Hettige, taking all that Professor Bandara just spoke about, what to you is, because let's face it, poverty is a very broad subject, and you spoke about income poverty. In your experience and in your studies of Sri Lanka, where can you pinpoint is the biggest issue in terms of poverty? Where is it that Sri Lanka is stuck? And how does it come out of that? Because obviously we can't solve the whole problem overnight.
Well, I think, poverty is only one way of, looking at the problem. There are so many areas that we have to look at in terms of identifying problems that people face and addressing those problems. Now, I'll give you an example. Now, say, for instance, people need not only money to buy basic things like food and fuel and so on and so forth. They also need very basic services, to really, take care of their families. Like, for instance, transportation is a very, very critical need, because people have to move around to have access to, various services like education and so on. And then also people need to have access to, health services. People need to have access to, education, So now the question is, how do we really, ensure that the people have access to these basic services which are very, very critical for their quality of life.
Now, these are services that are free in Sri Lanka.
That's right. No, but the point is that, though we say that these things are provided, socially, in fact, they are also provided, by private, people. Like, for instance, transportation is not entirely, publicly funded in Sri Lanka. We have, many people basically buying transport equipment because they cannot rely on the public transport system. Like, for instance, you look at the number of motorbikes we have in the country. We have a number of motorbikes in the country. And then we look at, let's say health, for instance, and we say that, people can have access to public health services. But on the other hand, people spend quite a lot of money on health services, access to, let's say, various testing services and so on. So what I'm getting at is that, when we look at, poverty, it is not only a matter of income, as I've already mentioned. It is also, having access to these very basic services. And then, of course, the assets. Like, if you don't have land, for instance, you may not be able to really produce, at least, some of the food that you require at a household level. Similarly, you access to water. And, for instance, if you don't have, let's say, publicly provided water services, then you have to basically, as somebody mentioned, travel, miles and miles to have access to water and so on. So, and then, of course, you are exposed to so many hazards. Like, for instance, like if you are in a congested urban area, you might be exposed to dengue mosquitoes if you are not protected from, the dengue mosquitoes. For instance, if you live in kind of very difficult, kind of situations where you are exposed to these hazards. So what I feel is that, you have to look at a whole range of areas in order to understand how we could address this problem of poverty that we are talking about. It's not just income. And of course, I can look at so many other things, like, for instance, the structure of employment, for instance. Those who have regular employment have a much better chance than people who don't have access to regular employment, like the people who are casually employed, people who are employed in the informal sector, and so on and so forth. Those who don't have, let's say, income security, those who don't have, let's say, job security, and so on and so forth. So there are so many inequalities in the employment sector itself.
Thank you, Professor Hettige. With that, we have to go in for a short commercial break. Gentlemen, when we were walking in, when I said let's not ask questions from Azra, I was actually kidding. you can ask questions from her. We'll go into a short commercial break. We'll be right back with more of poverty and inequality in Sri Lanka. Welcome back. You're watching Face the Nation. We are in discussion with three eminent individuals and of course our colleague Azra Hassan regarding poverty and inequality in our country. On the during the first and the second round, we were able to touch and understand what we mean by poverty and the actual issues that these people of our country face. Now, in the third round, which is also going to be open for the journalists to raise their questions, I want to draw your attention to a clip from Puttlam, where we have been able to see this second biggest issue, almost to say, Professor Bandara, I think you will agree with me, the wild elephant conflict, the issue pertaining to the human-elephant conflict has been seen everywhere, almost everywhere in the villages that we travel to. So let me draw your attention to this particular clip from Puttlam.
Kammatta, Kein Keta.
In Puttlam, the wild elephant conflict is the main issue that affects the residents of the Likolavawa, Kapupadiava, Mahakumbukadavala and Kaladi villages. Not only do wild elephants encroach on these villages, but they destroy all of their crops, adding to the mountain of issues that these people already face daily. The most recent of these wild elephant attacks was reported a day before the team arrived, claimed the life of one person.
Kammatta, Kein Keta.
Now that is the severity of the problem in the Puttlam district and especially these particular villages that we travel to, and this, as I said, is seen all across the country. Azra, you were also traveling to several areas. Now these major issues that we see, the lack of water, the lack of development, the lack of entry roads, and especially matters like this where the wild elephant conflict is also a problem. Now all of this has, to a certain degree, I think Dr. Binya also touched upon this, the government has to a certain degree started something and maybe given up, or they have not started at all. But there is not a single place where we see, or in our research we have been able to find out, of a completed project, of a location where people say, okay, this has been done, this issue has been sorted for us by be it an NGO, be it someone. But as Dr. Ariratna also said, the people are now trying to find solutions. We have seen this all throughout. Now, from 1 and 2 of our government, the door-to-door campaigns, and as well as the third phase, we saw this trend where people are coming in to solve their problems. Do you agree with this situation, or did you see something else when you travelled?
Of course, Chaturanga, I can tell you that when we went on Gamad, when we visited these villages, the one main thing that I saw in these villages were that they were very interested in finding a solution to these problems that they're facing. Because we go in the morning and we try and finish everything by 4 or 5 in the evening. We try and visit as much as villages we can. We have 3 main teams, but we still divide ourselves into like 6 teams and travel into villages because we want to go to many villages as we can. There are people till 8, 7 in the night expecting us to come to their villages and talk to them. We go to villages and see like 10s and 20s of people standing and gathered in one place just to speak to us. They know that this is our first stage of the 4th phase and that we can't immediately give them a solution. But they're still willing to spend their time and come and speak to us about the problems they issue. Chaturanga, we are in the 4th phase of the Gamma the Door-to-Door initiative. That itself says something. For a media organization to go into villages for the 4th consecutive time and to inquire into their problems really show the lack of effort made by the politicians in the country or the public representatives that we speak about all the time. Now, I think we should start calling people living in these rural areas the public representatives because they are the actual people who are representing the public. Because like you said, we came across projects done by the politicians to solve these issues. One such example is that when we were in this village called Pannagama in Ampara, there was a irrigation system that was built using 35 million rupees, according to the villagers, to distribute water to the lands that they cultivate. So one might question, so what's the problem? It's been fixed. But the problem is they don't have lands to cultivate. So we have done something. I think it is utterly poor management, because they have spent 35 million rupees to build this irrigation system to distribute water to the paddy fields. Because
poor management from the part of who, Azra?
Poor management. Now see, if you, let's say you are in charge of this particular project. If you say that we need irrigation system, why to distribute water to the lands that we cultivate? So where are the lands, Chaturanga? It's a very obvious question. So without lands, where are you going to cultivate? It's not like they have big houses or big lands to just cultivate. So I met one lady from Ampara. She was talking to us, something that is very close to my heart. She was telling me, we got this done. We urged the authorities to get this done. And right after that, our lands were taken for many reasons that they cite. But I have a daughter who passed the scholarship examination and got into a school in Kandy. And now she is doing her advanced level examination. I am helpless because I have no way of providing her the education that she deserves. So Chaturanga, this is the real story behind all what we see on television, on social media and things like that. You can't sit in Colombo or sit in offices and then assume or think about what these people are actually going through, because I myself, from my personal experience, I went to these people to speak to them. And I was thinking how fortunate we are our problems are minute to the problems that they face, because these are, like we've been mentioning all the time, they are basic necessities, Chaturanga, like water. And there are people dying because of chronic kidney diseases. Do they deserve this? Do those children deserve this? They don't.
Thank you, Azra. And I think I speak for all of us who have been traveling on the Gammat, the door-to-door campaign for the first, second, third, and now the fourth phase is also on. We have been able to compile, along with the support of the University of Peradeniya, take it up to the United Nations itself. And the original host of this program, Shamir Rasuldin, has also been able to take these documents to the Oxford University. They are placed there for the world to see these problems that are faced by the general public in our country. We do not mean this to bring disrepute to our country, but we ourselves have to understand where we stand and where we come from. And we can challenge any political individual with any political affiliation. We, the four of us and our teams, have definitely traveled more than you have to find out the problems in our country. And that's an open challenge. Anyone can prove otherwise. We are open for that challenge. Now, keeping all that aside, let's stick to our topic of poverty and inequality. Professor Bandara, as Asna mentioned, you have also been with us throughout. You have been a strong person who has been supporting this and pushing the Gammat initiative going forward. Professor Bandara, the question to you is very simple. Now we see, obviously, in the few months that we are about to see, we will see the political involvement of all of these people coming and saying various things. But all throughout, Professor Bandara, the helplessness of the people has to be taken into account. The people are helpless. We can say various things. We can come up with brilliant plans. But as Asta said, these plans will be made by the politicians sitting in some air-conditioned office in Colombo. But these plans do not go to the people. They are completely neglected and therefore they are completely helpless. What is your opinion on this?
Yes, plans are sometimes going to the villages, but the plans are not suitable in the places. That's one of the major problems. Actually, Chatura, we visited the Gammat, about 2,000 villages. We started in the 2016, then the 2017. And this is the 2018 reports, and now we are going to complete within few days the fourth
2019, yes.
phase of the Gammat. We visited the whole around the islands. No? Even look at this, you can see that's from northerns to the southerns, and we visited whole islands within 3 groups. And what we found is that's the main thing when I am going to analyze this data and writing this report. As you mentioned about that, all the villages, they have the problems. Actually, we didn't find any village, there is no problems. And we talk about the poverty today, and the poverty is related to the income. But what I am thinking is that there is a very big poverty in their education systems. And there is a big poverty for their drinking water and the agricultural water, that is irrigation water, and all these things are the big problem. As you mentioned about the human-elephant conflicts, that's a very serious issue in the lot of villages. Actually, that is in the 19 districts in Sri Lanka, there is a human-elephant conflict now. Because that is very serious, because how we protect our forest and how we allow them to live and how we allow the human to do their agricultural practices and others. And the animals involved in this is the big problem, because why I am saying this, this poverty is there in the villages because of the major problems which is coming from the activities what we are doing.
Yeah.
Activities what we are doing. The one thing is that the human-elephant conflict, you see, and the other animal conflict, we are destroying about 30% of our harvest because of that. And some villages, they are not doing their cultivation, they give up their cultivations. And the other thing, when you move into some villages, actually I will give good examples from Haguranketa, the Walapane areas and the Badulla, Valimada areas. People are now dropping their agricultural practices because there is no good market change. Actually, 3 days before I went to the Anguranketa Mandaranwara, then you see the one tomato kg is that the 5-10 rupees. They are giving the one box 100 rupees. That means the 1 kg they are paying only 5 rupees or 10 rupees. When I come to the candy and when I am getting that from market, it is 150 rupees or above 100 rupees. You see how the rurals are getting money and how the urban areas people are getting the money, because there should be a good market chain.
Yes.
Actually, last 3-4 decades this change occurred. That is why the big poverty is there, because we have the different poverty alleviation programs. We will discuss it. But what I am saying is that when we are visiting these villages, I think you have seen the few last, our fourth estate, every places where we are going. The water problem is, some schools, they are bringing 2 water bottles, one for drinking, one for the other sanitary purposes they are using. That is there. And some I found in the one village near to Gampola areas, the students, they are coming with their mothers to the schools. When their mothers are coming, they are bringing with all the clothes and all the things to wash in the river. Then they wash it and they put their child into the school, and then they go to the river and wash this and they bath, and then after that they collect the child from the schools and then they go to the home. That's what and the accessibility of the hospitals, that is very serious. There are a lot of issues in the villages. I think we need to consider about that. And as I mentioned about the policy is there, but the policy makers, they need to pay more attention to apply that policy in the proper way. Because we have the environmental policies above 80. How much environmental problems in our country today? The policies is there, but the monitoring, implementation, those things are the very important thing.
From garbage containers, Jamal. Yes.
Yes.
Dr. Ariratna, now in your opening remarks you said the poverty issue that we are facing for a prolonged period of time has been created through the system, most specifically the political system in the country, where the so-called public representatives keep certain parts of society in desperation, so that they know come an election they can go to the villagers, promise various things. They can promise to give them bridges, to give them drinking water, solve their wild elephant conflict, and when the votes are received they simply forget them. Can you tell me whether you can put a pin on it and tell us whether how or when this issue started, when this got inculcated into the system, when policymakers started to think, okay, now since if we keep them in this desperation, we are guaranteed another seat in the next election, we are guaranteed a seat in parliament or whatever the governing body is. Can you put a pin on it and tell when it started?
Yeah, I think it's a complex issue. I think the whole political system, how it evolved, and particularly after 1978 with the change in the electoral system and the introduction of the open market economy, I think the nexus between the economic system and the patronage political system was very, very dependent on each other. And if you look at even the so-called Samurdhi recipients, it's very strange to note that 600,000 people have been added. I think earlier 1.2 million, and then if the poverty has gone down, should there be 600,000 new recipients added to to receive the dole? At the same time, you have, I think, 26,000 officials to manage that scheme. It doesn't make sense. So I think we need to really look at the whole system, and also if you look at the ceremonies to award those. I mean, what a shame! I mean, you are really insulting the people. They may be poor, but there's a dignity for these people.
Yes.
How do you get these people to come and receive the Samurdhi certificate from a minister? And how many advertisements, how much money do they spend in public, signboards and press advertisements? Millions. I mean, isn't it a crime?
Yes.
Isn't this people's money? Don't they have any conscience? So I think this is the problem. So this system has to change. And also there are enough and more leaders who can stand up to develop their own communities. They have never got a chance. I think now we really need to, you must have seen in your projects as well, these leaders can be mobilized to have a bit bigger voice, give a voice to the people who are disempowered, and I think they can evolve a new system of governance, and we need to also show the way, and that way the people themselves can find a way out. Just another important point, I think we are facing disasters now. Now, right now as we speak, one part of the country is facing a severe drought.
Yes.
Another part, there's rain and floods and landslide risk, right? So we have not taken into account in our planning these disasters. Now, on top of that, man-made disasters. Yesterday, very unfortunately, there was an accident, 2 buses colliding. Now, this is a catastrophic thing for those families who are affected. So suddenly, dozens of people are driven into poverty. The same way, due to a natural disaster, if a family's small business is destroyed, there's no way that they can easily pick up. There's no insurance scheme, there's no help for them. So you are again pushing people into poverty due to these disasters. So I think we have got our priorities wrong. So this is the time that people really understand these macroeconomic and political forces that are keeping them impoverished, and then try to use this opportunity of defining a new political path. I think there we have some hope, and I think that in this election people will demand for a new direction for this country. I think that is a must, because as a country we cannot go on like this. We have to change course, particularly for those people who don't have a say in the mainstream right now.
One last question, if I may. Dr. Ariyanathan, now you spoke about alleviating poverty, and successive governments have brought in programs, policies and whatnot in order to alleviate this poverty, starting from the late 90s to now, from the Janasavya movement to the Samurdhi Benefit Scheme. Do you think it is merely a facade?
I think so, because actually you don't need to have a particularly focused scheme to eradicate poverty if the system doesn't produce poverty. Of course, there will be vulnerable groups who need to be paid special attention, and they need to graduate from a dependent environment into being self-sufficient in their finances and so on. But that has to be only a transition arrangement. It's not a country should not have a poverty alleviation ministry or something like that indefinitely.
Yes,
I think that's really a joke. We should aim at really empowering the people in total, social well-being, economic well-being, and really social justice. Then you can really eradicate poverty. And a country like Sri Lanka, so much blessed with natural resources, human resources, within maybe 5 to 10 years, we can totally eradicate poverty.
Thank you, Professor Bandar, actually for bringing up the issue in the north and the east and the drought problem. It's amazing, as reporters we find ourselves in one news bulletin saying that it's pouring with rain in this part of the country, but yet in the north and the east. It's bone dry, and who better than to talk to Azra about this? Azra, what did you see in the north and east in your time with Gammed?
You're right, Shehan, because
And actually, Azra, if I can just butt in there, I believe we have some footage of Vaunia. Shall we show that to our audience?
Yes, I think our producers will be able to put up the clip that we have from Vaunia that we compiled through our Gammed door-to-door initiative.
Gammed Kein Keta.
Residents of Thiruvegama in Vaunia live a life of sorrow in this region, where development has been reduced to only a dream. There is one well to provide water to the entire village, but the water in the well is contaminated. In a country that speaks of mega development, the residents of Sivapuram and Pudiyakovilakulam in Vaunia have been living in these micro-huts for decades. The lack of proper housing is a prominent issue in this village.
Gammed Kein Keta.
As I asked you, Azra, before that little clip, could you tell us what you saw yourself?
yes, Shehan, now like you mentioned, part of the country receives rain, whereas another part of the country is stricken by the drought. These people are not in a position to even survive on a daily basis. They always, every day, have to find their way of earning just to complete a day. So just imagine weather is something that is beyond our control, and things like that have also affected the people of this country. When we went from these different districts in Sri Lanka, it was more like many countries within Sri Lanka, because in one district they have their own set of problems, whereas in another district they have their own set of problems. It's like they have like different set of problems that is endemic to their own districts. So it's like many countries within Sri Lanka. So Shehan, like you said, something like the weather has also affected the people so much, where they, even when they have to try and survive a day, they also have to face the challenges posed by the environment.
Azra, if I may ask you another question. Now, the Gammed movement has empowered youth such as us to go into the villages, find out what the problems of the people are, and find a solution for these issues. What message would you give as a team leader and a youth to the society as to how we can address these issues? I mean, I know we can't solve these issues. At least we can address them and take them and draw the authorities' attention to them in order for them to provide a solution for it. What message would you give as a whole?
Jamal, you're right. I think it is time that the elderly politicians have to go home, because one thing that they don't and that we have, being the youth, is that strength and a genuine heart. Because you may be very well qualified when it comes to education, degrees and masters and all sorts of things, but if you are not sensitive towards the problems faced by the people, you don't deserve to be in positions where you represent the people. When I led a team for 3 days in Ampara, what I saw was that my team, including the rest of the teams that were representing Gammed, they were very enthusiastic to just go and speak to people and listen to the problems that they face. They had all the time. I mean, the youth may be inexperienced. We have a lot to learn. We have not lived as much as our politicians have lived, but we have what is most required, and that is the willingness to help the people of this country. Sure. Now, when we were on Gammed, we had to face a lot of difficulties, traveling, especially from Colombo to those rural villages. I spent 10 hours on the road just to reach Ampara, and when we were coming back, vehicles were breaking down, and we had several issues.
Various issues.
But that did not stop us, or that did not make us regret about the decision we made to go to Ampara and listen to the problems. It was all worth the hassle, the experience, and how those people welcomed us. So I think, like you said, that we need strength in the system. I'm very much inexperienced when compared to this distinguished expert panel we have here today. But yeah, so you all will agree with me if I say that the youth now has to come forward, because we have been watching, we have seen that what's been done in the country. It is time that we speak for ourselves and make sure that the rest of the Sri Lanka is also benefited by whatever the programs that has been implemented by the government.
Gentlemen, thank you for round 2 and 3 of questions. Looks can be deceiving. Azra is very young, even though she looks a bit old. But with that, we go in for a short commercial break. When we come back, the final round of Face the Nation. Welcome back. You're watching Face the Nation, the final round of poverty and inequality in our country. We have 3 eminent professors and of course our colleague Azra San, Professor Siri Hettige, Professor Tilak Bandara and Dr. Vinya Ariyaratne who joined us today to talk about this vast issue, but we wanted to focus it to a place and draw a parallel to what we have been able to find out through our Gum at the Door-to-Door initiative as well. And now I want to draw my attention to Professor Siri Hettige, and in our final few minutes, Professor, I want to ask you this question. Now, various areas in our country are stereotyped to have various issues, but that has not been the case from what we have been able to find out. Azra mentioned about Ampara and the land issue. We've seen the elephant crisis, the lack of water. But some areas, the politicians and the people who hold power have stereotyped the area to be of that issue. Anuradhapura, immediate thing that comes into your mind is the chronic kidney disease. Further down in the country, Ampara, Trincomalee, Mayangane area, the immediate thing that comes into your mind is the elephant crisis. This stereotyping and carrying out various projects, and now Azra also mentioned the same thing, where they now initiate problems, obviously because elections are almost coming up. They initiate problems that yield absolutely zero results, like what she mentioned of a canal being cut. We have seen several of those projects. Now, this abundance of projects that are aimed at elections is also unhealthy, isn't it, Professor?
Well, I think we have to remember that the issues that these people that you have been, going around and talking to face are not really random. There is a very clear, message that is coming from the world, that is from the rest of the world. We are faced with a major, problem of climate change. In fact, we are told that Sri Lanka is, really one of the most vulnerable, countries to climate change. In fact, if you look at the 10 most, vulnerable countries, Sri Lanka, is number 2. In other words, we are very much exposed to the ravages of climate change, and as a result, you will see more and more environmental problems that you are seeing. For instance, the droughts, the floods, the landslides, and so on and so forth. And therefore, these problems that you have been talking about are not going to get better, they might even get worse. Therefore, there is a need for us to be ready to deal with these issues in a big way. Now, the question about, poverty, actually it's not only a moral issue. I think it is a major problem that we have to address in order to tap the potential of the people in this country. If you have a large section of the population neglected, living under, very difficult circumstances, producing all kinds of problems, not just for themselves, but also for the rest of society, then it is a big issue that we have to address in order to address the wider problems of society. Now, for instance, if you don't develop the full potential of a large segment of the population, it is a major problem for the entire country. Therefore, inequality should not be considered as a moral question, a question of social injustice. It's also a question of not being able to really tap the full potential of the human resources that we have in the country. And of course, there are so many other benefits that we are going to. The other point is that I think there are two issues. Now, there are opportunities for us. We should not only be talking about problems. Now, for instance, if you look at the economy of this country, it depends on basically the resources that we have, natural resources and human resources. And if we really tap the full potential of the human and the natural resources in this country, we would be able to develop this country within a reasonable period of time. I'll give an example. Now, for instance, have we really exhausted the possibilities of developing the agricultural sector in this country? Certainly not. In fact, we have neglected the agricultural sector, to a very, very great extent, and there's an enormous potential. We have to not only go for food production, we have to go for producing a whole range of, things, making use of biomass that you can easily produce in this country. In fact, we have to make the transition today from non-biodegradable to biodegradable. If we don't make that transition, we are going to have a massive environmental crisis. But also, if you do not really, if we can make use of that potential, we would be able to even industrialize, our rural areas, because all that biomass that you can produce can be the basis for rural industrial development. In other words, you can produce, so many things that the people need using biodegradable material instead of using non-biodegradable material, which is really polluting the environment, like plastics and things like that. Yep. So that is one issue. The other potential that we have is, as I already mentioned, we have to strike a balance between the sectors. Industrial sector has to be developed, because we are almost totally dependent on the rest of the world for industrial goods. I mean, everything that we are surrounded by, what is that? These are all industrial produce. Now, the point is, now if we import all the industrial goods that we need, ranging from the mobile telephone that we all carry and all the other gadgets that we are using in the education sector, health sector, transport sector, and so on and so forth, we are not going to make any headway. Yes. So that the point that I am trying to make is that we have to strike a balance between the sectors. And finally, the political. You see, we have enough political resources in this country. I consider political, sector, political system as a resource. In other words, we have a three-tier system of government. We have a central government, we have a provincial government, we have a local government. Now, actually, if we develop the full potential of each one of these segments, we certainly need the national. Because, how do you address the larger issues, of the country unless you have a very efficient, streamlined, policy-driven central government. I think that is what we need. A leaner government at the center. We need a cleaner government at the center, and that you can have, and actually that has to be a residual government. In other words, we have to really pass the responsibility down the line, as Vinya said. That I think the most important, as far as the ordinary people are concerned, as far as the development of the country is concerned, as far as the quality of life is concerned, as for addressing these issues that we are talking about, this is the area that we have to strengthen. That is the local government. And actually, if you develop the local government sector in this country, in 1998, we submitted a 300-page report to the government on local government reform. Actually, we have put all these ideas that we have been discussed here and elsewhere into that report. Now, if you really revamp the local government sector in this country, you can address a whole range of issues that we have faced with, especially the issues that we have been talking about. And then, of course, in between, we have the provincial. Actually, if you don't address that issue, you're not going to have peace in this country. You have to really, you have to have justice across regions. You have to have equity across regions. And to do that, you have to develop the middle layer of governance. And that is the provincial or regional or whatever you want to call it. So, in other words, the political system is a resource, but it has become a liability in this country because of mismanagement. I think if you really streamline the governance structure in this country, which consists of these three layers, we would be able to really provide the basis for the development of this country and address a whole range of social and other issues that we have in the country. I don't want to go too on and on. I can go on and on, but the point is the time is limited. But I think we should certainly start thinking about making use of the resources that we have, both economic, social, both economic and political, and of course we'll have to make use of the people that we have in this country, and that is the biggest resource that we have.
Thank you very much, Professor Hettige. Let me very quickly move to Dr. Ariratna. Professor has taken a bit of your time as well, Dr. Ariratna, in explaining this issue. But I want to ask a question. I think Jayamal also wanted to raise this question from you, but time is running out. So let me draw this to you. You spoke about the Samurdhi benefit as well. Now, do you think that the areas that are actually affected by poverty and the areas that are receiving the Samurdhi benefit and other benefits that are given by the government are the real situation, or do you think it's not working out properly?
No, I think there's no pattern as such. I think there are, as Professor also referred to, there are disparities in all parts of the country. So there are of course certain population groups that you can identify that they are below poverty line, but deprivation I don't think follows the Samurdhi beneficiary pattern. I think we need to identify areas where they are specially deprived and also have special focus programs. But I think there are more fundamental structural changes that need to be done in order to provide equal opportunities for employment, equal opportunities for people to access services. Now, few areas I can mention now, even Professor mentioned about the climate change and the impact on the communities. There are ways of coping. There are mechanisms where you can build community resilience, that they will be better prepared, and even water management systems. There is also technology now that's available, which is not really that expensive, and even the government departments have they have a mandate to introduce those solutions to the community. The problem is, because of our corrupt system, these solutions don't reach the communities, and communities are being asked to find their own solutions. So I think we have to get the systems now revamped, and for that, as Azra said, the youth have to take the leadership. It's not that the youth can fix everything, but at least there has to be a transition to bring that energy, that huge potential that the youth have, and also communication technology that's available. It's actually a very equitable technology, science now. So I think we can, if we can put together those resources and really try to focus on changing this governance system to make it more accountable and find leaders who can then occupy these positions. That's the most important thing. We need new leaders for this country. Youth should also come forward, but other generations have to also support that, and women leadership is so important. 51% are women, but how many are in the parliament, how many are in the provincial councils? So I think that has to be given priority, and if we develop in a systematic way the youth leadership, the women leadership, and those of us who are in other sectors can give professional support, I think we can save this country, we can build this country.
Thank you, Dr. Ariratna. Azra, let me quickly move on to you. As Doctor mentioned, female representation is very much appreciated in our country. You are a team leader of Gammadda. You have your own team going into the villages and finding the problems faced by the general public. What will be the future plans in the coming few days? Professor Bandara will also be a part of our Gammadda program in the future as well. What does the plan look like? Very quickly, Azra.
Chaturanga, I think I should first thank the chairman of the Capital Maharaja organization, Raja Mahendran, for giving us the opportunity and for providing means for us to engage in this initiative that we have launched. We will be going to villages from house to house and from door to door until the 10th of this month, Chaturanga, to inquire into the problems faced by the people. This is our 4th edition. When we initially started this and when we listened to the problems, we thought that we will be able to find a solution, or the authorities will come forward when they say this on television to find a solution, but that didn't happen. So that made us take matters into our own hands, whereas we went, spoke to the general public, got the necessary funds from whoever that is capable to help us, together with the University of Perak Denia, and we compiled a research report where we bring everything that we have found out into one report, so we can proceed further on this initiative. And that's when we selected the special number of projects, some issues that we can solve, and made sure that these issues are solved, like broken roads, bridges, water, and things like that. So Gammadda has been is not something new to the people in Sri Lanka. It's not just that they have seen this on television. People in rural Sri Lanka, when we go there, they know why we're coming there. So we have a lot of plans, Chaturanga, to make sure that most of the problems are being solved or resolved, or that we direct them to the relevant authorities to at least see if they'll come forward to help us with this. So yes, that will be the future plan, and we are hoping to go on until the 10th of this month. We are hoping that we will not have to go for a 5th edition, that someone will take responsibility and come forward to actually solve these issues. So yes.
Thank you, Azra. With that, let me move to Professor Bandara. As I've been mentioning throughout the show, the University of Peradeniya has been a very valuable partner in the overall Gammadda project that we have been carrying out, be it the Gammadda Door-to-Door initiative, the Gammadda Savia, and all the other Gammadda projects throughout the past 4 years. Professor, very quickly, I want to ask you this question as well. We are talking of things that have been carried out in the country. We are talking of the problems that persist. We're talking of, as Professor Siri Hettige mentioned, the 3 tiers of governance, the local, provincial and central government. There are so many people that can take responsibility for things that are happening in our country. In fact, in our first round, we spoke about this. There are about 10,000 politicians who should be held accountable. But at the moment, no one seems to be caring.
Yes, Chaturanga, I think these politicians and everybody who is looking into this, they have to pay more attention. When what we found is that one thing I want to mention here, that this data is revealed that the 4 major pockets in the poverty in the Sri Lankan. One is actually when you look at the northern parts, the Mullaitivu and the Mana. The Mullaitivu actually 28.8% poverty is there, and the Mana it is going with the 20.1%. Overall Sri Lanka we are discussing about the 4.1%. But in the other sides, the Kilinochchi also including with that's the one pocket what we need to pay more attention in Sri Lanka. In the other thing about that, the eastern points, actually Ampara and the Batticaloa districts, I think we need to pay more attention with that, because the Batticaloa, the 19.4% is there with the poverty according to the census and the statistics department's data. And we also found that is another pockets where we need to pay more attention. And the other one is that the Uva points. Uva points, there is another pockets which is coming with the Monragala and some parts of the Badulla. Then that is another pockets where we need to pay more attention if you are going to eradicate, if you need to do that. I think this is what the next political body, they should need to pay more attention about the Sri Lankan developments. And the another one is that the southern parts of the Hambantota, these areas are the highly vulnerable areas, and the peoples are facing the big problems. Therefore, I think we need to pay more attention. Chatura, we need to pay that. But we paid more attention for in the 1970s, the food stamp systems and it is Janasavia and then Samurdi. Then I can remember that the Maganaguma, then Divinaguma and the Gam Savia and the Gam Peralia now came. I don't know how it is going on. Then different strategies came and how those things are working and how that is support for developments of the country. That's we need to rethink again. And as Dr. Ariratna mentioned about that, we need to do that and identify where we did wrong things or where we did the correctly. And the another one, we need to think about that, because in 2000 to 2015, globally, the United Nations, we agree in the Millennium Development Goals, and we achieved some, but there is a problems in the villages when we are going. But in the 2015, we signed the documents in the Paris. That is what the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to achieve that in the 2030.
Yes.
I don't know where we are now. Yes. Because we have the Ministry in the Wildlife and the Sustainable Developments, then they have to carry on that. Or the National Policy Planning Ministry, they have to carry, department, they have to carry on that. Because 2030 we need to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and eradication of the poverty and the zero hungers and all these things. Then I think there should be a proper plan to achieve these things. Because we are doing the research, and I want to thanks to the Newsfirst and we collaborated with the University of Peradeniya. We did a lot of works from 2016 to 2019 now, and we found a lot of problems in the villages and different problems, and you did a lot of development programs in the areas, and thank you very much for that. As a private organization is supporting for the rural developments, and the government also doing something, and you also doing something, but that is what the needed things for the development of the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. With that, we come to a close of Face the Nation this evening. Let me thank our guests for being here with us and talking to us about poverty and inequality in our country. Thank you, Azra, for being here with us. Azra is the Assistant Manager of English News, and she's also a GUM at the team leader. Thank you, Dr. Ariratna, the President of the Sarvodaya Movement, for being here with us this evening. Thank you, Professor Tilak Bandara, Professor of Geography of the University of Peradeniya, for being here with us this evening. And finally, Professor Siri Hettige, Emeritus Professor of the University of Colombo. Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, Azra, and of course, Jaimal and Shehan as well, for joining us this evening and keeping this program lively and bringing in your valuable points to the table as well. Let me conclude by saying this: Sri Lanka has everything, but due to the rampant corruption in our country, due to the arrogance to show sympathy towards the problems faced by the people, and also the flippant level of negligence of those who rule, has brought us to a place where we have to once again question whether Sri Lanka does actually have everything. That's all we have for you from Face the Nation this evening. Thank you very much for watching.